They all thought Elena Vasquez was just another invisible cleaner, pushing her cart through the gleaming corridors of Meridian Corporate Tower at 5 a.m. when the world was still asleep. But when a terrorist attack trapped the city's most powerful executives on the 40th floor, and her dog tags slipped from beneath her uniform during the chaos, revealing the call sign, Ghost 7 inches, that made even the building's ex-military security chief break into a cold sweat. Everyone realized they had been sharing elevators with a legend they never knew existed. The morning routine at Meridian Corporate Tower began the same way it had for the past 18 months. Elena Vasquez pushed her cleaning cart through the marble-floored lobby, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished stone. At 42, she moved with an economy of motion that most people mistook for the tired shuffle of someone resigned to menial work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her navy blue cleaning uniform hung loose on her compact frame, designed to make her as unremarkable as the potted plants scattered throughout the buildings. Common areas. The security guards at the front desk barely glanced up as she swiped her employee badge and headed toward the service elevators. To them, she was part of the building's invisible infrastructure, as essential and unnoticed as the ventilation system or the emergency lighting. Marcus Thompson, the head of security and a former Army sergeant with 2 tours in Iraq under his belt, occasionally nodded in her direction, but their interactions never went beyond basic pleasantries about the weather or the building's maintenance schedule. Elena had cultivated this invisibility deliberately. After 23 years in the military, including 12 years in positions that officially didn't exist, she had learned the value of blending into the background. The cleaning job at Meridian Corporate Tower provided exactly what she needed: steady work, minimal social interaction, and the kind of routine that helped quiet the memories that still visited her. In the early hours of the morning, the building housed some of the most influential corporations on the East Coast. Meridian Financial occupied floors 20 through 35, while Blackstone Defense Contractors had claimed the top 10 floors for their executive operations. The lawyers, consultants, and investment bankers who filled the building's offices during business hours moved through their days with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to being the smartest individuals in any room they entered. Elena had observed their patterns for months. She knew which executives arrived first, which ones stayed latest, and which ones treated the cleaning staff with basic human courtesy versus those who looked through her as if she were made of air. Margaret Winters, the chief financial officer of Meridian Financial, fell firmly into the latter category. She had a habit of leaving confidential documents scattered across her desk, apparently confident that the cleaning woman lacked the education or interest to understand their significance. David Chun, Blackstone's vice president of operations, was marginally better. He at least acknowledged Elena's presence with a brief nod when she cleaned his office, though he never removed his headphones or paused his phone conversations. Like most of the building's occupants, he had constructed a careful bubble of professional importance that excluded anyone wearing a service uniform. The corporate culture at Meridian Tower reflected the broader attitudes of its tenants. Success was measured in quarterly profits, market share, and the size of one's office windows. The executives who made 6- and 7-figure salaries seemed to view the support staff as interchangeable components in a machine designed to facilitate their comfort and productivity. Elena had watched junior associates mock the accents of the overnight security guards and seen vice presidents complain loudly about the temperature settings, apparently unaware that the maintenance staff could hear every word. This environment of casual dismissal extended beyond mere rudeness. During her time at Meridian Tower, Elena had witnessed behavior that would have resulted in immediate disciplinary action in any military unit. Confidential conversations conducted in hallways where anyone might overhear. Sensitive documents left unsecured on desks and in conference rooms. Computer passwords written on sticky notes attached to monitors. The building's occupants operated under the assumption that their privacy was protected by the social invisibility of the service staff rather than any actual security measures. Elena's background made her particularly sensitive to these lapses in operational security. During her military career, she had specialized in information gathering and threat assessment in environments where a single oversight could result in catastrophic consequences. The casual attitude toward security at Meridian Tower would have horrified her former colleagues in the intelligence community, but she had learned to suppress those instincts along with most other aspects of her previous life. The cleaning schedule provided Elena with unprecedented access to the building's operations. She arrived each morning at 5 a.m., 2 hours before the earliest executives, and finished her rounds by 1 p.m., allowing her to observe the full spectrum of corporate activity. Her cart contained the standard array of cleaning supplies, but Elena had modified the storage compartments with the same attention to detail she had once applied to mission equipment. Everything had its place, every tool served multiple purposes, and the entire setup could be reconfigured quickly if circumstances required. Adaptation. Her colleagues in the maintenance department knew her as a reliable worker who never called in sick, never complained about difficult assignments, and possessed an unusual talent for solving practical problems. When the building's security system malfunctioned, Elena had quietly suggested modifications to the guard rotation that improved coverage without requiring additional personnel. When a water leak threatened to damage expensive computer equipment, she had improvised a containment system using materials from her cleaning cart that prevented thousands of dollars in losses. These contributions went largely unnoticed by the building's management, though Marcus Thompson had begun to pay closer attention to Elena's suggestions. Something about her calm competence reminded him of the non-commissioned officers he had served with overseas, though he couldn't quite identify what triggered that association. She possessed a quality of situational awareness that seemed unusual for someone in her position, noticing details about the building's operations that escaped the attention of people with far more formal authority. Elena's living situation reflected the same preference for simplicity and anonymity that characterized her work. She rented a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood 20 minutes from Meridian Tower, furnished with the bare essentials and decorated with nothing that might reveal details about her past. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet woman who worked early hours and kept to herself, the kind of tenant that landlords appreciated for paying rent on time and never causing problems. The transition from military to civilian life had been more challenging than Elena had anticipated. The skills that had made her invaluable in specialized operations had no obvious civilian applications, and the personality traits that had served her well in high-stress environments often seemed inappropriate in corporate settings. She had learned to modulate her natural intensity, to resist the urge to analyze every situation for potential threats, and to suppress the automatic tactical thinking that had once been essential for survival. But old habits died hard, and Elena found herself cataloging details about Meridian Tower's operations with the same systematic approach she had once applied to intelligence gathering. She noticed which executives met privately in supposedly secure conference rooms, which companies were being discussed as potential acquisition targets, and which employees seemed to be struggling with personal problems that might make them vulnerable to external pressure. The information served no immediate purpose, but the mental discipline of observation helped maintain skills that Elena wasn't quite ready to abandon completely. The cleaning cart became her mobile command center, equipped with supplies that served double duty. The spray bottles contained standard cleaning solutions, but Elena had selected formulations that would also be effective for emergency decontamination. The microfiber cloths were chosen for their durability and versatility in situations that might require improvised medical supplies or restraints. Even the trash bags were military grade. capable of serving as waterproof storage or emergency shelter materials if circumstances demanded creative adaptation. Elena's routine brought her into contact with conversations and documents that revealed the full scope of Meridian Tower's business operations. Blackstone Defense Contractors was currently negotiating a major contract with the Pentagon, involving security systems for overseas installations. Meridian Financial was managing investments for several foreign governments, including some with questionable human rights records. The lawyers on the 10th floor were handling mergers that would affect thousands of jobs across multiple industries. This information swirled around Elena like background noise, interesting but irrelevant to her current life. She had no intention of returning to the world of international intrigue and classified operations that had defined her military career. The cleaning job provided exactly the kind of peaceful anonymity she needed to process the experiences that had led to her early retirement from service. But the observer in her couldn't help noting details that might become significant under different circumstances. The building's security measures were adequate for normal corporate operations, but would be insufficient against any serious threat. The guard stations were positioned to monitor public areas, but left significant blind spots in the service corridors and mechanical spaces. The electronic access controls were comprehensive, but relied on cards that could be easily duplicated by anyone with basic technical skills. Most importantly, the security staff operated under the assumption that their primary concerns were petty theft and unauthorized access by competitors or journalists, not the kind of coordinated attack that Elena's military experience suggested was entirely possible. As she moved through her morning routine, Elena maintained the same professional detachment that had characterized her approach to intelligence work. She observed, analyzed, and filed away information without becoming emotionally invested in the outcomes. The executives who dismissed her existence were simply following predictable patterns of human behavior. The security lapses were unfortunate, but not her responsibility to address. The confidential information she encountered was interesting, but irrelevant to her current objectives. This careful emotional distance had become Elena's primary coping mechanism during her transition to civilian life. The alternative, allowing herself to care deeply about situations she couldn't control, had led to the kind of stress-related problems that ended military careers and destroyed personal relationships. Better to observe the world with professional detachment than to risk the kind of engagement that had once defined her identity. But even the most carefully constructed emotional barriers couldn't completely suppress the instincts that had kept Elena alive during operations in some of the world's most dangerous locations. When she noticed unusual patterns in the building's daily rhythm, when she observed behavior that seemed inconsistent with normal corporate routines, when she detected signs of potential security threats, those observations registered in ways that she couldn't entirely ignore. The morning of March 15th began like any other day at Meridian Tower, but Elena sensed something different in the building's atmosphere as soon as she stepped off the service elevator. The security guards seemed more alert than usual, and there were subtle changes in the executive staff's behavior that suggested heightened anxiety about something beyond normal business concerns. It was the kind of environmental shift that Elena had learned to notice during her military service, when survival often depended on recognizing danger before it became obvious to everyone else. Elena's background was a carefully guarded secret that she had no intention of sharing with her colleagues at Meridian Tower. The official story, the one that appeared on her employment application and in casual conversations with other maintenance staff, was simple and unremarkable. She had served 8 years in the Army as a logistics coordinator, managing supply chains and inventory systems at various stateside bases. After her discharge, she had worked a series of temporary jobs before landing the cleaning position at Meridian Tower. It was the kind of straightforward, military to civilian transition that everyone could understand. And nobody found particularly interesting that the reality was far more complex. Elena Vasquez had spent 23 years in the United States military, but only the first 3 years resembled anything close to conventional service. Her initial assignment as a signals intelligence analyst had been a cover for recruitment into a program that existed in the shadowy space between official military operations and classified intelligence work. By age 25, she was operating under deep cover in locations that didn't appear on any public maps, conducting missions that would never be acknowledged by any government agency. Her call sign, Ghost 7, had been earned during a 3-month operation in Eastern Europe that resulted in the disruption of an arms trafficking network responsible for supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across the Middle East. Elena had spent 67 days posing as a translator for a humanitarian aid organization, gathering intelligence and identifying key targets, while living under conditions that would have broken most trained operatives. The success of that mission had established her reputation within the special operations community as someone who could adapt to any environment and accomplish objectives that others considered impossible. The skills Elena had developed during her military career went far beyond conventional combat training. She was fluent in 7 languages and conversational in 4 others, capable of blending into local populations across multiple continents. Her expertise in electronic surveillance and counter-surveillance had been honed during operations where detection meant not just mission failure, but probable death. She could assess the tactical vulnerabilities of any building within minutes of entering it, identify potential weapons in any environment, and develop contingency plans for scenarios that most people would never consider possible. But perhaps her most valuable skill was the ability to become invisible in plain sight. During her years of covert operations, Elena had perfected the art of appearing to be exactly what people expected to see. She could adopt the mannerisms and speech patterns of different social classes, ethnic groups, and professional backgrounds, with the same ease that other people changed clothes. The cleaning woman persona she had created at Meridian Tower was just one of dozens of identities she had developed and refined over the course of her career. Elena's transition to civilian life had been precipitated by an operation in Central Asia that had gone catastrophically wrong. Intelligence failures had led to the compromise of an entire network of local assets, resulting in casualties that Elena still carried with her during sleepless nights. The official after-action report had cleared her of any responsibility for the intelligence failures, but Elena had requested immediate reassignment to non-operational duties. 6 months later, she had submitted her retirement papers and disappeared into the anonymous world of civilian employment. The dog tags she wore beneath her cleaning uniform were not standard military identification. The name engraved on the metal was accurate, but the service number and unit designation were part of a cover identity that had been maintained throughout her operational career. More significantly, the tags contained a small electronic chip that would identify her to any military or intelligence scanner as Ghost 7, an operative with clearance levels that exceeded those of most general officers. Elena kept the tags as a reminder of who she had been, though she had no intention of ever using the credentials they represented. Her expertise in threat assessment made Elena acutely aware of the security vulnerabilities that permeated Meridian Tower. The building's glass and steel construction created obvious problems for defensive positioning, while the open floor plans and multiple access points would make evacuation extremely difficult in an emergency. The ventilation system was accessible from multiple locations. The elevator shafts provided convenient routes for vertical movement, and the building's integration with the city's infrastructure created dependencies that could be exploited by anyone with basic knowledge of urban systems. Elena had identified at least 17 different ways that hostile forces could compromise the building's security, ranging from cyber attacks on the electronic access systems to physical assault through the parking garage or rooftop helicopter pad. The building's location in the city's financial district made it an attractive target for any group seeking to disrupt economic activity or capture high-value hostages. Most troubling, the security measures in place were designed to address conventional threats like theft or vandalism. Not the kind of coordinated attack that Elena's experience suggested was entirely possible in the current geopolitical environment. During her daily cleaning rounds, Elena had unconsciously begun conducting the kind of detailed reconnaissance that had been routine during her operational years. She knew the locations of all security cameras and their blind spots, the positions of emergency exits and potential choke points, and the daily schedules of everyone from executive staff to maintenance personnel. This information had no immediate relevance to her current life, but the mental discipline of observation helped maintain skills that Elena wasn't ready to abandon completely. Her colleagues in the maintenance department had noticed Elena's unusual competence in solving practical problems, though they attributed it to general intelligence rather than specialized training. When the building's fire suppression system had malfunctioned during a routine test, Elena had quickly identified a bypass procedure that allowed the system to be reset without calling expensive emergency technicians. When a power failure had disabled the electronic locks on several conference rooms, she had improvised a temporary solution using materials from her cleaning cart that allowed normal operations to continue. These demonstrations of practical problem-solving ability had earned Elena a reputation as someone who could be relied upon in difficult situations, though her supervisors remained unaware of the depth of expertise underlying her suggestions. Elena was careful to present her solutions as common sense approaches rather than the result of specialized knowledge that might raise uncomfortable questions about her background. Marcus Thompson, the building's head of security, had begun to pay closer attention to Elena's observations about the building's operations. His military experience had taught him to recognize competence in unexpected places, and something about Elena's situational awareness reminded him of the kind of non-commissioned officers who formed the backbone of effective military units. She noticed details that escaped the attention of people with far more formal authority, and her suggestions for improving security procedures invariably proved to be both practical and effective. Thompson had attempted to engage Elena in conversations about her military service, but she had deflected his questions with the kind of polite evasiveness that suggested uncomfortable memories. He respected her privacy while noting that her body language and speech patterns were consistent with someone who had experienced significant combat stress. In his experience, veterans who were reluctant to discuss their service had usually been involved in operations that were either classified or traumatic, and often both. Elena's apartment reflected the same preference for operational simplicity that characterized her approach to work. The furniture was functional and easily replaceable, positioned to provide clear sight lines to all entrances and potential escape routes. Her personal possessions were minimal and organized according to principles that would allow rapid evacuation if circumstances ever demanded it. The emergency supplies she maintained were far more comprehensive than anything a civilian would normally require, including communication equipment, medical supplies, and enough cash to support extended travel without using credit cards or other traceable financial instruments. The neighborhood where Elena lived provided the kind of anonymity that had been essential during her operational years. The residents were primarily working-class families and recent immigrants who minded their own business and didn't ask uncomfortable questions about their neighbors' backgrounds. The apartment building's security was adequate for normal purposes, but could be bypassed easily by anyone with Elena's training, a vulnerability that she found oddly comforting since it meant she wasn't trapped by systems she couldn't control. Elena's daily routine outside of work was designed to maintain physical fitness and mental alertness while avoiding activities that might attract attention or create social obligations. She ran 5 miles every morning through routes that varied according to a pattern that would make surveillance difficult. Her grocery shopping, banking, and other routine activities were conducted according to protocols that would frustrate anyone attempting to establish predictable patterns in her behavior. The isolation that Alina had cultivated as a security measure was beginning to take an emotional toll that she hadn't anticipated. During her military career, the intensity of operational requirements had provided sufficient distraction from personal concerns, while the camaraderie of military units had fulfilled most of her social needs. Civilian life offered neither the purposeful intensity nor the built-in community that had previously sustained her, leaving Alina to confront aspects of herself that operational requirements had allowed her to ignore. The cleaning job at Meridian Tower served multiple purposes. Beyond simply providing income, the physical routine helped maintain the kind of disciplined schedule that Alina needed to function effectively, while the early morning hours accommodated sleep patterns that had been disrupted by years of irregular operational schedules. Most importantly, the work provided a legitimate reason to be present in an environment where Alina could exercise her observational skills without raising questions about her motivations. Alina's expertise in human behavior made her acutely aware of the social dynamics that shaped daily life at Meridian Tower. The executives who occupied the building's upper floors operated according to hierarchies and protocols that were often more rigid than anything Alina had encountered in military settings. Status was communicated through office size, parking assignments, and access to exclusive meeting rooms, while advancement depended on navigating complex networks of personal relationships and unstated expectations. The support staff who kept the building functioning existed in a parallel social structure that was largely invisible to the executives they served. Alina had observed that maintenance workers, security guards, and cleaning staff developed their own communication networks and informal protocols for managing the building's operations. These networks often possessed more accurate information about daily activities than the official channels used by management, since support staff had access to areas and conversations that executives assumed were private. Alina's position as a cleaner provided her with unprecedented access to information that would have been valuable during her operational years. Confidential documents left unsecured on desks, private conversations conducted in supposedly empty conference rooms, and electronic communications displayed on unattended computer screens revealed details about business operations, personal relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with hostile intentions. This constant exposure to sensitive information created ethical dilemmas that Alina hadn't anticipated when she accepted the cleaning position. Her training had taught her to gather and analyze intelligence as automatically as most people breathed, but she had no legitimate use for the information she was acquiring. The discipline required to observe without acting on her observations was more challenging than any physical demands of her current work. The arrival of spring brought subtle changes to the daily rhythms of Meridian Tower that Alina noticed before anyone else. Longer daylight hours affected the building's energy consumption patterns, while warmer weather led to modifications in the ventilation system that created new acoustic properties in previously quiet areas. These environmental changes were insignificant to most building occupants, but Alina's training had taught her to notice alterations in familiar patterns, since such changes often provided early warning of developing situations. Alina had been working at Meridian Tower for 18 months when she first noticed the subtle indicators that something significant was being planned. It wasn't anything dramatic or obvious, just the kind of minor deviations from routine that her training had taught her to recognize as potential warning signs. The changes were so small that even Marcus Thompson, with his military background and security responsibilities, remained completely unaware that anything was amiss. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday morning in mid-March when Alina observed two men in expensive suits conducting what appeared to be a casual survey of the building's main lobby. They carried briefcases and wore visitor badges, but their behavior was inconsistent with normal business visitors. Instead of heading directly to their destination or checking in with reception for directions, they spent nearly 20 minutes examining architectural details, emergency exit locations, and security camera positions. Their movements were too systematic, too thorough, and too subtle to be anything other than professional reconnaissance. Elena continued her cleaning routine without any obvious change in behavior, but she filed away every detail of the two men's appearance and activities. Their clothing was expensive but generic, the kind of business attire that would allow them to blend in at any corporate facility. They carried themselves with the confident posture of people accustomed to authority. But their eyes moved constantly, cataloging details with the systematic approach of trained observers. Most tellingly, they showed no interest in the building directory or any of the normal indicators that would help legitimate visitors find their destinations. 3 days later, Elena noticed unusual activity in the building's parking garage during her early morning arrival. A white panel van with commercial delivery markings was parked in a location that would provide optimal access to both the service elevators and the emergency stairwells. The vehicle appeared legitimate at first glance, but Elena observed several details that triggered her operational instincts. The license plate was current but showed minimal wear, suggesting recent acquisition. The delivery company logo was professionally applied, but displayed minor inconsistencies in font spacing that indicated amateur production. Most significantly, the van remained in position for over 4 hours without any apparent delivery activity. Elena's attempts to bring these observations to the attention of building security were met with polite dismissal. When she mentioned the suspicious visitors to Marcus Thompson, he explained that the building regularly hosted tours for potential clients and business partners. Her concerns about the delivery van were attributed to a scheduling mix-up with one of the building's regular suppliers. Thompson appreciated Elena's vigilance, but his responses made it clear that he viewed her observations as the well-intentioned but inexperienced concerns of someone unfamiliar with normal business operations. The systematic nature of Elena's training made it impossible for her to ignore the accumulating evidence that Meridian Tower was being targeted for some kind of operation. Over the following week, she documented additional suspicious activities that followed patterns consistent with sophisticated surveillance and preparation. Unusual telephone calls to executive offices were being placed from untraceable numbers, asking questions about meeting schedules and security procedures. Several employees reported receiving requests for building access information from people claiming to represent government agencies or business partners. But when Elena discreetly investigated these claims, she found that the supposed organizations had no record of such contacts. Elena's expertise in operational planning allowed her to recognize the methodical approach being employed by whoever was conducting surveillance on Meridian Tower. The reconnaissance activities were being spread across multiple days and conducted by different individuals to avoid creating obvious patterns. The information being gathered focused specifically on security measures, evacuation procedures, and the daily schedules of high-value personnel. This was not random criminal activity or corporate espionage, but the kind of systematic intelligence gathering that preceded major operations. The building's executive staff remained completely oblivious to the developing threat. Margaret Winters continued to leave confidential financial documents unsecured on her desk, apparently convinced that her office's location on the 30th floor provided adequate protection from unauthorized access. David Chun from Blackstone Defense Contractors maintained his habit of conducting sensitive phone conversations in public areas, confident that the building's professional atmosphere ensured privacy. Neither executive showed any awareness that their daily routines were being observed and cataloged by people with potentially hostile intentions. Elena's growing concern about the situation created a difficult dilemma. Her military training and Operational experience provided her with the knowledge to recognize a developing threat that others couldn't see. But her current position as a cleaning woman meant that her warnings were being dismissed as the anxious concerns of someone who lacked the expertise to understand normal business operations. She could provide more detailed information about her observations, but doing so would require revealing aspects of her background that she had worked carefully to conceal. The frustration of watching a predictable disaster develop while being unable to convince anyone in authority to take preventive action reminded Elena of some of the most challenging aspects of her military career. During covert operations, she had often possessed information that could prevent casualties or mission failures, but operational security requirements had prevented her from sharing that information with people who lacked appropriate clearances. The civilian world operated according to different rules, but the essential problem remained the same. Critical information was being ignored because of assumptions about the source's credibility and expertise. Elena's analysis of the surveillance activity suggested that the target was most likely the Blackstone Defense contractors' offices on the building's upper floors. The company's involvement in sensitive government contracts made it an attractive target for foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations seeking to compromise national security information. Alternatively, the financial assets managed by Meridian Financial could be the objective if the operation was motivated by economic rather than political considerations. Either way, the systematic nature of the reconnaissance indicated that whatever was being planned would be far more sophisticated than routine corporate crime. The breakthrough in Elena's understanding of the threat came when she observed a meeting between two of the suspicious visitors and someone she recognized as a recently hired maintenance worker. The new employee, who had introduced himself as Carlos Rivera, had joined the building's maintenance staff only 2 weeks earlier. But Elena had noticed several inconsistencies in his behavior that suggested his background story might not be entirely accurate. His technical knowledge was impressive, but his familiarity with building systems seemed too comprehensive for someone who was supposedly new to the facility. Elena positioned herself to overhear portions of the conversation between Rivera and the visitors, though she had to be extremely careful to avoid detection. What she heard confirmed her worst suspicions about the developing situation. The discussion included references to access points, timeline coordination, and extraction routes that were unmistakably related to operational planning. More alarming, the conversation included specific details about executive schedules and security procedures that could only have been obtained through inside access to confidential information. The realization that the threat to Meridian Tower included an insider component fundamentally changed Elena's assessment of the situation. External surveillance could be countered through improved security measures, but a compromised employee with authorized access to building systems represented a much more serious vulnerability. Rivera's position in the maintenance department provided him with legitimate reasons to be present in sensitive areas at unusual hours, while his access to building plans and security systems could facilitate virtually any kind of hostile operation. Elena's military experience had taught her that successful operations against hardened targets almost always required inside assistance, but she had hoped that the corporate environment would provide some protection against such infiltration. The discovery that Meridian Tower security had already been compromised meant that whatever was being planned could probably be executed successfully unless immediate countermeasures were implemented by people with appropriate expertise and authority. Her attempts to alert Marcus Thompson about Rivera's suspicious activities met with the same polite dismissal that had greeted her previous warnings. Thompson explained that all new employees underwent background checks before being hired, and Rivera's credentials had been thoroughly verified. Elena's concerns were attributed to the natural suspicion that existing employees sometimes felt toward newcomers, especially when the newcomers demonstrated superior technical competence The dismissive response to her warnings about Rivera convinced Elena that the building's security apparatus was fundamentally inadequate for dealing with the kind of sophisticated threat that was developing. Thompson was a competent professional with solid military experience, but his training had prepared him for conventional security challenges like theft, unauthorized access, and workplace violence. He lacked the background in covert operations that would allow him to recognize the subtle indicators of advanced surveillance and infiltration. Elena found herself in an impossible position. Her expertise and training provided her with clear evidence that Meridian Tower was being targeted for some kind of major operation, but her current identity as a cleaning woman meant that her warnings were being dismissed by the very people who had the authority to implement effective countermeasures. She could reveal more details about her background and qualifications, but doing so would compromise the carefully constructed civilian identity that had allowed her to escape from her previous life. The ethical implications of the situation were equally troubling. Elena had information that could potentially prevent significant harm to innocent people, but sharing that information would require her to abandon the anonymity that had become essential for her psychological well-being. Her retirement from military service had been motivated by a desire to escape from the constant stress and moral ambiguity of covert operations, but circumstances were forcing her to confront the possibility that such escape might be impossible. As March progressed toward its end, Elena noticed an acceleration in the suspicious activity surrounding Meridian Tower. The reconnaissance visits became more frequent, the questions about security procedures more detailed, and Rivera's behavior more obviously inconsistent with his supposed role as a maintenance worker. The timeline for whatever operation was being planned seemed to be advancing rapidly, but Elena's warnings continued to be dismissed as the anxious concerns of someone who lacked the background to understand normal business operations. The breaking point came during the last week of March when Elena intercepted a conversation between Rivera and an unknown contact that included specific references to target confirmation and final preparation phase. The conversation took place in a service corridor that was normally deserted during business hours, but Elena's cleaning schedule had brought her to the area at the exact moment when the call was taking place. What she heard made it clear that whatever operation was being planned against Meridian Tower was moving into its final stages. Elena spent that night in her apartment, staring at the dog tags that represented a life she had tried to leave behind. The small metal rectangles contained not just her name and service information, but access codes that would identify her to any military or intelligence database as Ghost 7, an operative with clearance levels and operational experience that exceeded those of most general officers. Those credentials could give her the credibility needed to convince authorities to take her warnings seriously, but using them would mean abandoning the peaceful anonymity she had worked so hard to achieve. The decision was made for her the following morning when Elena arrived at Meridian Tower to find that Rivera had failed to report for work. His absence, combined with unusual activity in the building's parking areas and several unscheduled deliveries to offices that normally received no outside shipments, convinced Elena that the operation she had been tracking was about to commence. Whatever was going to happen at Meridian Tower was no longer a theoretical threat, but an immediate and present danger. The morning of April 3rd began with deceptive normalcy at Meridian Tower. Elena arrived at her usual time, noting immediately that the white panel van she had been tracking was no longer in its customary position in the parking garage. In its place were two different vehicles, a black SUV with tinted windows and a repair truck bearing the logo of a telecommunications company she didn't recognize. Both vehicles were positioned strategically near the building's service entrances, and Elena's trained eye cataloged the subtle modifications that suggested they were equipped for purposes far beyond their apparent civilian functions. Marcus Thompson was conducting his morning security briefing with his usual professional competence, unaware that the building he protected was about to become the target of a coordinated assault. Elena passed by the security office during her routine cleaning rounds, hearing fragments of conversation about routine maintenance schedules and visitor protocols. The normalcy of the discussion was almost surreal, given what Elena knew was coming. But she maintained her invisible cleaning woman persona while internally calculating the building's defensive vulnerabilities and potential evacuation routes. At 9:15 a.m., Elena was cleaning the executive conference room on the 32nd floor when she noticed unusual electromagnetic interference affecting the building's wireless communication systems. Her smartphone, which had maintained consistent signal strength throughout her 18 months at Meridian Tower, suddenly displayed no service bars. The building's internal Wi-Fi network, normally robust and reliable, became intermittently unavailable. These were not random technical malfunctions, but the systematic disruption of communications that preceded coordinated attacks. Elena's military experience had taught her to recognize the signs of electronic warfare being employed against civilian targets. The pattern of interference was too selective and too precisely timed to be accidental. Someone was using sophisticated jamming equipment to isolate Meridian Tower from external communications while maintaining enough functionality to prevent immediate panic among the building's occupants. It was exactly the kind of preliminary operation that would precede a major assault. The first overt sign of trouble came at 9:47. Elena observed 4 men in business suits entering the building through the main lobby. To casual observers, they appeared to be ordinary corporate visitors, but Elena immediately recognized the professional bearing and tactical awareness that marked them as operators with significant military or paramilitary training. They moved with the controlled confidence of people accustomed to violence, their eyes constantly scanning for threats and opportunities, while maintaining the facade of legitimate business visitors. Elena positioned herself to observe their movements while continuing her cleaning routine. The 4 men split into 2 teams, each pair heading toward different elevator banks with the kind of coordinated timing that indicated extensive rehearsal. Their destinations appeared to be the upper floors, where Blackstone Defense Contractors and Meridian Financial maintained their most sensitive operations. Elena noted that their visitor badges were professionally produced, but displayed subtle inconsistencies that suggested fraudulent creation. At 10:12 a.m., the building's fire alarm system activated without warning. The piercing sound that filled every floor was accompanied by automated announcements directing all occupants to evacuate using the nearest stairwells. Elena recognized immediately that this was not a routine drill or system malfunction, but a deliberate activation designed to create chaos and force building occupants into predictable movement patterns that could be exploited by hostile forces. The response to the fire alarm revealed the fundamental inadequacy of Meridian Tower's emergency procedures. Executives and staff began moving toward the stairwells in the orderly fashion prescribed by evacuation protocols, unaware that they were following routes that had been carefully studied by people with hostile intentions. The building's security staff, trained to maintain order during routine emergencies, were unprepared for the possibility that the alarm itself might be part of a coordinated attack. Elena made a split-second decision that would fundamentally alter everything that followed. Instead of joining the evacuation or continuing her cleaning routine, she abandoned her cart and began moving against the flow of evacuating personnel, heading toward the upper floors where she anticipated the real assault would take place. Her military training had taught her that the most effective way to counter a coordinated attack was to disrupt the attacker's timeline and force them to adapt to unexpected complications. The service stairwells provided Elena with rapid vertical movement while avoiding the crowded main staircases filled with evacuating personnel. Her compact build and exceptional physical conditioning allowed her to climb multiple floors without the exhaustion that would slow most people, while her knowledge of the building's layout helped her avoid security cameras and potential choke points. where she might be observed by hostile forces. As Elena reached the 25th floor, she encountered the first clear evidence that Meridian Tower was under coordinated assault. Two men wearing maintenance uniforms but carrying military-grade weapons were positioned to intercept evacuating personnel from the Meridian financial offices. Their equipment included automatic rifles, tactical body armor, and communication devices that were far beyond anything legitimate maintenance workers would possess. Elena realized that the supposed evacuation was actually a herding operation, designed to concentrate high-value targets in controllable locations. Elena's assessment of the tactical situation was grimly professional. The attackers had effectively isolated the building from external communications, created chaos through the false fire alarm, and positioned armed personnel to control the movement of potential hostages. The coordination and equipment involved suggested a level of sophistication that exceeded most terrorist organizations, indicating either state sponsorship or involvement by highly trained mercenary forces. The discovery that armed personnel were already positioned throughout the building meant that whatever operation was underway had moved far beyond the reconnaissance phase that Elena had been tracking. The attackers had somehow gained access to detailed building plans, security procedures, and personnel schedules that would allow them to execute a complex operation with minimal resistance. The inside assistance that Elena had suspected was now clearly confirmed. Elena's position as an invisible cleaning woman suddenly became a significant tactical advantage. The attackers had planned their operation around controlling known personnel and anticipated resistance from building security, but they had no awareness that a former special operations soldier was present and mobile within the building. Elena possessed both the training and the motivation to disrupt their carefully orchestrated plan. Moving with the silent efficiency that had characterized her covert operations, Elena began conducting reconnaissance of the attackers' positions and capabilities. Her knowledge of the building's layout allowed her to use service corridors and maintenance areas that were unfamiliar to the hostile forces, while her experience in urban warfare provided her with the tactical understanding needed to assess their strengths and vulnerabilities. From her concealed position on the 26th floor, Elena observed a coordination meeting between several of the attackers. Their discussion revealed that the operation was focused on capturing specific, high-value personnel from both Blackstone defense contractors and Meridian Financial. The targets included executives with access to classified defense contracts and financial managers who controlled assets belonging to foreign governments. This was not a random terrorist attack, but a precisely planned operation with specific political and economic objectives. The overheard conversation also revealed the attackers' timeline and extraction plan. They intended to complete their hostage selection and secure their targets within 2 hours, then use the building's helicopter landing pad for evacuation. The coordination required for such an operation indicated months of planning and significant financial resources, confirming Elena's assessment that this was a sophisticated assault by professionally trained operatives. Elena's military experience told her that the window for effective resistance was rapidly closing. Once the attackers completed their initial positioning and began the hostage selection process, any intervention would risk massive civilian casualties. The building's security force, even if they recognized the true nature of the threat, lacked both the training and equipment needed to counter armed professionals operating with detailed intelligence about the facility. The realization that she might be the only person capable of preventing a catastrophic outcome forced Elena to confront the choice she had been avoiding since her retirement from military service. She could maintain her carefully constructed civilian identity and hope that law enforcement would eventually resolve the situation, or she could accept that circumstances were forcing her back into the world of violence and moral ambiguity that she had tried to escape. Elena's internal struggle was interrupted by the sound of automatic weapons fire from somewhere above her position. The sharp crack of military rifles was unmistakable and indicated that the attackers had encountered some form of resistance, probably from building security personnel who had realized that the situation was far more serious than a routine fire alarm. The gunfire meant that the operation had moved beyond the preliminary phase and into active hostilities. The decision was made for Alina when she observed two attackers dragging an injured security guard toward the stairwell. She recognized the guard as James Morrison, a young veteran who had always treated her with courtesy and respect during her time at Meridian Tower. Morrison was conscious but bleeding from what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his shoulder, and his captors were discussing whether he might be useful as a hostage or should be eliminated as a potential threat. Elena's training had taught her that successful military operations often depended on individual soldiers making split-second decisions that could alter the outcome of entire campaigns. The sight of Morrison in the hands of hostile forces triggered every protective instinct that had been developed during her years of service. The peaceful civilian life she had tried to build was about to be shattered, but Alina discovered that her fundamental identity as a protector of innocent people had never really changed. Moving with deadly silence, Alina approached the two attackers from their blind spot. Her knowledge of close-quarters combat had been honed during operations where stealth and precision were essential for survival. The first attacker was unconscious before he realized he was under attack, while the second was neutralized with lethal efficiency before he could raise an alarm or harm Morrison further. Alina quickly assessed Morrison's injuries and determined that he would survive if he received medical attention within the next hour. She helped him to a secure position in a maintenance closet, providing basic first aid while explaining that she was going to attempt to disrupt the attacker's operation. Morrison's shocked expression revealed his amazement at seeing the quiet, cleaning woman demonstrate combat skills that exceeded those of most military professionals. The moment Alina neutralized the two attackers, she crossed a line that she had hoped never to cross again. The careful emotional distance she had maintained from violence was shattered, and the tactical mindset that had defined her military career reasserted itself with frightening clarity. Alina Vasquez, the cleaning woman, ceased to exist, replaced by Ghost 7, a special operations veteran with the training and experience needed to wage war against professional killers. As Alina moved through Meridian Tower's service corridors, her dog tag shifted beneath her uniform, the small metal rectangles carrying credentials that could change everything if anyone had the clearance to understand their significance. But for now, Alina was operating alone, using skills that most people couldn't. Imagine to protect innocent civilians from an enemy that had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the quiet woman they had never bothered to notice. The gunfire that had echoed through Meridian Tower's upper floors created a ripple effect of panic that spread throughout the building faster than any official communication could have managed. In the main security office on the ground floor, Marcus Thompson stared at his bank of monitors with growing alarm as multiple camera feeds showed scenes that defied his understanding of what should have been a routine fire drill evacuation. Thompson's military experience had prepared him for many emergency scenarios, but the images on his screens revealed a situation that exceeded his worst-case planning. Armed figures in business suits were moving through the building with tactical precision, while his security personnel were either missing from their assigned positions or visible on camera in states of obvious distress. The communication blackout that had disabled both cellular and landline connections meant that Thompson couldn't contact external law enforcement or even coordinate effectively with his own scattered team. The first casualty report reached Thompson through the building's internal radio system when Officer Patricia Chun managed to transmit a brief message before her signal was cut off. Multiple armed hostiles on floors 25 through 35. Morrison is down. Williams is missing. This is not a drill. Request immediate backup. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Thompson to process the horrifying reality that Meridian Tower was under coordinated assault by forces that had somehow penetrated every layer of security. Thompson's attempts to evade the building's lockdown procedures met with systematic failure. Electronic access controls had been compromised, emergency communication systems were jammed, and the closed-circuit television network was displaying obvious signs of interference. Whoever had planned this operation possessed detailed knowledge of the building's security infrastructure and had prepared countermeasures for every defensive capability that Thompson's team possessed. In the executive conference room on the 34th floor, Margaret Winters was experiencing her own crisis of understanding as she watched armed men systematically search the Meridian financial offices. The fire alarm that had initially seemed like a minor inconvenience had transformed into a nightmare scenario that her corporate training had never prepared her to handle. The realization that she was trapped in a building under attack by professional killers was almost too overwhelming to process. Winters had spent her entire career managing financial risks and market uncertainties, but the immediate physical danger she now faced was entirely outside her area of expertise. The confident authority that had characterized her interactions with subordinates and colleagues evaporated in the face of automatic weapons and tactical body armor. She found herself hiding behind an overturned conference table, struggling to understand how her predictable corporate world had suddenly become a war zone. David Chun from Blackstone Defense Contractors was having a different but equally disturbing experience on the 36th floor. His background in defense contracting had provided him with theoretical knowledge about security threats and terrorist operations, but the reality of being hunted by armed professionals was far more terrifying than any briefing or training exercise had suggested. The classified contracts and sensitive information that had made him valuable in the corporate world had apparently also made him a specific target for whatever operation was unfolding in Meridian Tower. Chun's military contractors had always operated in distant locations where American personnel were protected by multiple layers of security and support. The idea that such violence could reach into the heart of America's financial district challenged every assumption he had made about personal safety and national security. As he listened to automatic weapons fire echoing through the building's corridors, Chun realized that his knowledge of global security threats had been entirely theoretical until this moment. The building's maintenance staff, scattered throughout Meridian Tower when the attack began, found themselves in the impossible position of being potential witnesses to an operation that the attackers could not afford to leave behind. Elena's colleague Roberto Martinez was hiding in a utility room on the 15th floor, listening to radio communications that made it clear the building was under siege by forces that possessed military-grade equipment and training. Martinez had worked at Meridian Tower for 8 years and had never imagined that his routine maintenance duties could place him in mortal danger. The quiet building that had been his workplace had become a battlefield where his survival depended on remaining invisible to people who would kill him without hesitation if they discovered his presence. The transformation was so sudden and complete that Martinez struggled to believe it was really happening. Elena's absence from the maintenance staff's usual rallying points was noticed by her supervisor, Frank Morrison, but he assumed she had been caught up in the evacuation procedures like everyone else. Morrison had no way of knowing that the quiet cleaning woman he had worked with for 18 months was currently moving through the building's service areas with the deadly efficiency of a trained killer, systematically disrupting an operation that threatened hundreds of innocent lives. The attacker's operational plan had accounted for resistance from building security and potential interference from law enforcement, but they had not anticipated the presence of someone with Elena's background and capabilities. Their intelligence gathering had been thorough and professional, but it had failed to identify the most significant threat to their mission success. Elena's carefully maintained invisibility, which had protected her civilian identity, now became a crucial tactical advantage in her campaign against the hostile forces. Elena's elimination of the two attackers, who had captured James Morrison, provided her with valuable intelligence about the overall operation. The weapons and equipment she recovered included military-grade communications gear that allowed her to monitor the attackers' radio traffic. What she heard confirmed her assessment that this was a professionally planned operation with specific objectives and a detailed timeline for completion. The radio communications revealed that the assault team consisted of 12 operatives divided into 3 squads with distinct responsibilities. The first squad was responsible for securing the building's perimeter and preventing external interference. The second squad was conducting the actual hostage selection on the upper floors, while the third squad was preparing extraction routes and maintaining communication with external support elements. The coordination and discipline evident in their communications indicated extensive training and significant operational experience. Elena's interception of the attackers' communications also revealed the identity of their primary targets. Margaret Winters was wanted because of her access to financial accounts belonging to several foreign governments, while David Chen was valuable because of his knowledge of classified defense contracts. Several other executives were designated as secondary targets who could provide additional leverage in whatever political or economic objectives the operation was designed to achieve. The discovery that the attackers possessed such detailed information about Meridian Tower's personnel confirmed Elena's suspicions about inside assistance. Someone with access to confidential corporate records had provided the operational intelligence that made this assault possible. Elena's analysis of the communications suggested that the insider was still active and providing real-time updates about building conditions and personnel movements. Elena's tactical assessment of the situation was sobering. The attackers possessed superior numbers, better equipment, and detailed intelligence about the building's layout and security measures. They had successfully isolated Meridian Tower from external assistance and were systematically achieving their operational objectives. Under normal circumstances, resistance would be futile and potentially counterproductive since it might result in unnecessary civilian casualties. But Elena's circumstances were far from normal. Her special operations background provided her with capabilities that the attackers could not have anticipated, while her 18 months of daily observation had given her intimate knowledge of the building's systems and vulnerabilities. More importantly, her emotional investment in protecting the people she had worked alongside transformed what should have been a hopeless situation into a personal mission that drew upon every skill she had developed during her military career. Elena's first priority was gathering additional intelligence about the attackers' capabilities and intentions. Using the building's service corridors and maintenance areas, she began a systematic reconnaissance of their positions and activities. Her movements were guided by the same principles that had kept her alive during covert operations in hostile territory: remain invisible, gather information, and strike only when success was certain. The picture that emerged from Elena's reconnaissance was both encouraging and alarming. The attackers were professionals, but they were operating in an environment that was unfamiliar to them and relying on intelligence that was not completely accurate. Their knowledge of the building's official layout was comprehensive, but they were unaware of several unofficial modifications and hidden access routes that Elena had discovered during her routine maintenance work. More significantly, the attackers' operational security was compromised by their assumption that they faced only conventional resistance from undertrained security personnel. Their communications were encrypted, but not beyond Elena's ability to decode, while their tactical positions were optimized for controlling civilian personnel rather than defending against attack by someone with advanced military training. Elena's assessment of her own capabilities was equally realistic. She possessed the skills and knowledge needed to disrupt the attacker's operation, But she was vastly outnumbered and lacked the heavy weapons that would be required for a direct assault. Her advantages lay in surprise, mobility, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. But these would be sufficient only if she could execute a campaign of precision strikes that systematically degraded the attacker's capabilities without exposing herself to overwhelming retaliation. The emotional weight of returning to combat operations was something Elena had hoped never to experience again. The psychological distance she had maintained from violence during her civilian life dissolved completely as she prepared to engage enemies who threatened innocent people. The careful mental barriers she had constructed to protect herself from traumatic memories crumbled under the immediate necessity of survival and protection. But along with the familiar stress of combat came the equally familiar clarity of purpose that had defined Elena's military career. The complex moral ambiguities that had troubled her during covert operations were replaced by the simple imperative of protecting innocent people from immediate harm. For the first time since her retirement, Elena felt the complete integration of her skills, knowledge, and moral convictions that had made her such an effective operator. As Elena prepared to begin her campaign against the attackers, her dog tag shifted against her chest, the small metal rectangles carrying credentials that represented a life she had tried to abandon. But circumstances had forced her to acknowledge that some aspects of identity could never be completely discarded. Ghost 7 had returned to active duty, and the attackers who had dismissed the building's cleaning staff as irrelevant obstacles were about to discover the fatal consequences of their oversight. Elena moved through Meridian Tower's hidden infrastructure with the silent precision that had characterized her most successful covert operations. The building's service tunnels, utility shafts, and maintenance corridors formed a parallel transportation network that existed beneath the awareness of most occupants, including the attackers who had spent months studying the facility's official blueprints. Elena's 18 months of daily cleaning routines had familiarized her with every hidden access point, forgotten storage area, and unofficial modification that deviated from the architectural plans. Her first objective was to establish a secure base of operations from which she could coordinate a systematic campaign against the hostile forces. Elena selected an abandoned electrical room on the 22nd floor that provided access to multiple vertical shafts while remaining invisible to the building's official security cameras. The room contained backup communication equipment that had been installed during the building's original construction but never removed when newer systems were implemented, giving Elena potential access to external communications if she could bypass the jamming that was isolating Meridian Tower. Elena's methodical approach to the crisis reflected training that had been refined during operations where improvisation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She began by cataloging the weapons and equipment she had acquired from the two attackers she had neutralized, assessing their capabilities and limitations with the same analytical precision she had once applied to enemy assets in foreign territories. The automatic rifles were reliable but limited by ammunition constraints, while the tactical body armor provided protection against small arms fire but would restrict her mobility in confined spaces. The communications equipment Elena had captured provided her with real-time intelligence about the attackers' movements and intentions. Their radio traffic revealed a level of operational discipline that confirmed her assessment of their professional training, but it also exposed coordination protocols and timing requirements that could be exploited by someone with sufficient tactical knowledge. Elena began mapping their communication patterns, identifying the command structure and decision-making hierarchy that governed their operations. Elena's analysis of the intercepted communications revealed that the attackers were operating under significant time pressure. Their extraction timeline required them to complete hostage selection and secure their primary targets within 90 minutes of the initial assault. Any delays in their operational schedule would force them to choose between abandoning objectives and accepting increased risk of external interference from law enforcement agencies that might eventually overcome the communication blackout. The pressure of the timeline created vulnerabilities that Elena could exploit through carefully planned disruptions. Each delay she could impose on the attacker's schedule would force them to make increasingly desperate decisions about resource allocation and risk acceptance. Elena's experience in psychological warfare had taught her that even professionally trained operatives would begin making mistakes when their carefully rehearsed plans encountered unexpected complications. Elena's first strike was designed to create maximum confusion with minimal risk to civilian personnel. She accessed the building's environmental control systems through a maintenance terminal that the attackers had overlooked, systematically altering temperature and lighting conditions on floors where hostile forces were operating. The changes were subtle but disorienting, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that would degrade the attackers' confidence in their intelligence and preparation. The environmental manipulation was followed by more direct action against the attackers. Communications infrastructure. Elena used her knowledge of the building's electronic systems to introduce interference patterns that degraded radio clarity without completely disrupting communications. The partial signal degradation created enough confusion to slow the attackers' coordination while leaving their conversations audible to Elena's monitoring equipment. Elena's systematic approach to disrupting the attacker's operation drew upon principles she had learned during unconventional warfare training. Rather than attempting direct confrontation with superior forces, she focused on creating cumulative stress through multiple small complications that would eventually overwhelm their ability to adapt. Each individual disruption was minor, but the combined effect would force the attackers to divide their attention between their primary objectives and an increasing number of operational problems. The psychological impact of Elena's campaign became evident through changes in the attackers' radio communications. What had initially been calm, professional coordination began to show signs of frustration and concern as seemingly random technical problems accumulated beyond the normal friction of complex operations. Team leaders began questioning their intelligence about building systems, while individual operatives reported equipment malfunctions and environmental conditions that had not been anticipated during their planning. Elena's knowledge of human behavior under stress allowed her to predict how the attackers would respond to the mounting complications. Professional training would initially maintain discipline and operational focus, but continued degradation of conditions would eventually trigger more aggressive responses as team leaders attempted to regain control of the situation. Elena positioned herself to exploit the tactical mistakes that would inevitably result from such aggressive responses. The first major error came when one of the attacker squads abandoned their assigned positions to investigate the source of the environmental problems that were plaguing their operations. Elena had anticipated this response and was waiting in concealment when 3 operatives entered the maintenance areas where she had been manipulating building systems. The confined space and poor visibility of the utility corridors negated the attackers' advantages in numbers and firepower while maximizing Elena's superior knowledge of the terrain. Elena's engagement with the 3-person patrol was brief and decisive. Her approach emphasized speed and silence, neutralizing each target before they could alert their colleagues or create noise that might endanger civilian personnel in nearby areas. The combat skills that had been refined during high-risk operations in foreign territories proved entirely adequate for dealing with professionals who lacked her intimate knowledge of the battlefield environment. The elimination of the patrol provided Elena with additional weapons and equipment while simultaneously degrading the attackers' overall capabilities. More importantly, the disappearance of 3 operatives would force the remaining attackers to divert resources from their primary mission to investigate what had happened to their missing personnel. Elena's analysis of their communication protocols suggested that operational doctrine would Require them to assume the worst-case scenario and adjust their timeline accordingly. Elena's prediction proved accurate when the attackers' RDIO traffic revealed growing concern about the missing patrol. Team leaders began implementing security procedures that were designed for operations in contested territory, including shorter patrol intervals, redundant communication checks, and defensive positioning that prioritized force protection over mission accomplishment. These adaptations reduced the attackers' operational efficiency while creating additional opportunities for Elena to exploit their divided attention. Elena's systematic campaign against the hostile forces was complicated by her parallel responsibility to protect civilian personnel who remained trapped throughout the building. Her monitoring of the attackers' communications revealed that hostage selection was proceeding according to their original timeline, despite the disruptions she had created. Margaret Winters, David Chen, and several other high-value targets had been identified and were being moved to secure locations where they could be consolidated for extraction. The knowledge that innocent people were being processed for what would almost certainly be a hostage situation requiring Elena to balance her tactical objectives with humanitarian concerns. Direct action against the attackers carried the risk of provoking retaliation against civilian personnel, while allowing the operation to proceed unopposed would result in the kidnapping of people who had shown Elena nothing but professional courtesy during her time at Meridian Tower. Elena's resolution of this tactical and moral dilemma reflected the same principled approach that had guided her military career. She would continue her campaign against the attackers while implementing measures to protect civilian personnel, accepting increased personal risk in order to minimize harm to innocent people. This decision required her to abandon several tactical options that would have been more effective but potentially dangerous to hostages. Elena's protection of civilian personnel began with her manipulation of the building's public address system to provide warnings about safe areas and evacuation routes that the attackers were unlikely to monitor. Her messages were coded in language that would be meaningless to hostile forces but provided crucial information to building occupants who possessed sufficient knowledge of the facility's layout. The warnings allowed many people to avoid areas where the attackers were operating while maintaining the appearance of random evacuation patterns. Elena's most challenging rescue operation involved extracting James Morrison from the medical emergency that was developing from his gunshot wound. The security guard's condition was deteriorating despite Elena's first aid, and he required professional medical attention that would not be available until the building was secured. Elena's solution required her to access the building's emergency medical supplies, while simultaneously creating a secure evacuation route that would allow Morrison to reach safety without exposing him to additional violence. The medical extraction required Elena to temporarily abandon her campaign against the attackers in order to focus on humanitarian objectives. She used her knowledge of the building's service elevators to transport Morrison to the parking garage, where she improvised a concealed position that would provide protection until external medical assistance became available. The operation consumed valuable time and resources while exposing Elena to detection risks that she would normally have avoided. Elena's commitment to protecting innocent people extended beyond immediate rescue operations to include long-term strategic considerations about how the crisis would be resolved. Her military experience had taught her that hostage situations typically ended either through negotiated surrender or tactical assault by specialized law enforcement units. Either resolution would be influenced by the tactical situation that existed when external forces finally gained access to the building. Elena's analysis of the probable law enforcement response suggested that SWAT teams would eventually breach the building through ground-level access points, potentially creating crossfire situations that would endanger civilian personnel. Her disruption of the attackers' operations was designed not only to prevent the completion of their mission, but also to Position hostile forces in locations where they could be neutralized by external assault teams, without significant risk to innocent people. The cumulative effect of Elena's systematic campaign was becoming evident through increasingly desperate communications among the remaining attackers. What had begun as a precisely coordinated operation was deteriorating into a series of crises. Management decisions as team leaders struggled to adapt to complications that had not been anticipated during their planning phase. Elena's invisible war against the hostile forces was succeeding in ways that exceeded her most optimistic projections. As Elena prepared for the next phase of her operation, she reflected on the strange circumstances that had forced her back into the world of violence and tactical decision-making that she had tried to escape. The quiet cleaning woman who had sought anonymity and peace had been replaced by Ghost 7, a special operations veteran whose skills were proving essential for protecting innocent people from a threat that conventional security measures could not address. The transformation of Meridian Tower from a routine corporate environment into an active combat zone had been so rapid and complete that many of the building's occupants were still struggling to process the reality of their situation. But in the external world, the signs of Elena's invisible campaign against the attackers were beginning to manifest in ways that caught the attention of people with the training and clearance to understand their significance. At the Federal Bureau of Investigation's regional headquarters, Special Agent Sarah Martinez was monitoring communication intercepts from the financial district when she noticed anomalous patterns in the electronic signature surrounding Meridian Tower. The building appeared to be experiencing systematic disruptions to its communication infrastructure, but the patterns were too precise and too strategically focused to represent random equipment failures or routine technical problems. Martinez's background in counterterrorism operations had taught her to recognize the fingerprints of professional interference with civilian infrastructure. Agent Martinez's analysis of the electronic intelligence revealed that someone inside Meridian Tower was conducting sophisticated electronic warfare against parties unknown. The jamming patterns that were isolating the building from external communications were being systematically degraded by countermeasures that demonstrated knowledge of both the attacking systems and the building's internal electronic architecture. This was not random resistance, but a coordinated campaign by someone with advanced technical training and detailed knowledge of the target environment. The implications of Martinez's discovery were significant, enough to warrant immediate escalation to higher authority levels. The presence of professional-grade electronic warfare capabilities in a civilian office building suggested either a major terrorist operation or a covert action by foreign intelligence services. Either possibility required a federal response that exceeded the capabilities of local law enforcement agencies. Martinez initiated emergency protocols that would mobilize specialized tactical units, while requesting intelligence support from agencies with appropriate clearances and capabilities. Meanwhile, at the Department of Defense's Intelligence Analysis Center, Colonel James Patterson was reviewing overnight reports when he encountered references to unusual activity in the financial district that triggered automatic alerts in classified databases. The electronic signatures being detected around Meridian Tower matched patterns associated with operations conducted by personnel with access to advanced military training and equipment. Patterson's clearance level allowed him access to databases that contained information unavailable to civilian law enforcement agencies. Colonel Patterson's search of classified personnel records revealed disturbing possibilities about who might be conducting sophisticated operations in a civilian environment. The tactical patterns evident in the Meridian Tower situation were consistent with methodology taught in special operations schools, but they also suggested knowledge of systems and procedures that were restricted to personnel with extremely high security clearances. Patterson began cross-referencing current intelligence reports with historical records of operations conducted by units that officially didn't exist. Elena's systematic disruption of the attacker's operation was having effects that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation inside Meridian Tower. Her interference with their communications and coordination was forcing the hostile forces to adapt their procedures in ways that made their activities increasingly visible to external monitoring systems. The attackers' attempts to regain operational control were creating electronic signatures that intelligence agencies could detect and analyze even through the jamming that was isolating the building. The degradation of the attackers' operational security was most evident in their increasingly desperate attempts to maintain communication with external support elements. Elena's manipulation of the building's electronic systems had forced them to use backup communication methods that were less secure and more susceptible to interception by intelligence agencies. The content of these communications was providing federal analysts with crucial information about the scope and objectives of the operation. Elena's monitoring of the attackers' radio traffic revealed growing frustration among their leadership, as the systematic complications she had created began to cascade into more serious operational problems. Equipment that had functioned perfectly during planning and rehearsal was experiencing mysterious malfunctions. Environmental conditions in the building were becoming increasingly uncomfortable and disorienting. Most critically, the timeline that governed their extraction plan was being steadily eroded by delays and complications that seemed to multiply faster than they could be resolved. The psychological pressure of operating under constantly degrading conditions was beginning to affect the attacker's decision-making in predictable ways. Elena's experience with stress-induced tactical errors had taught her to recognize the signs of professional competence deteriorating under the accumulated weight of unexpected complications. Radio communications that had initially been calm and precise were becoming increasingly terse and emotional, as team leaders struggled to maintain control of an operation that was spiraling beyond their ability to manage. Elena's analysis of the attackers' communication pattern suggested that they were approaching a decision point where they would be forced to choose between abandoning their primary objectives and accepting significantly increased risks to complete their mission. Her systematic campaign of disruption had been designed to force exactly this kind of decision, since either choice would create opportunities for her to exploit their reduced capabilities or increased desperation. The first indication that the attackers were beginning to make tactical errors came when Elena observed two teams abandoning their assigned positions to consolidate their forces in what they perceived as a more defensible area. The movement violated their own operational security protocols and created gaps in their coverage that Elena could exploit to access areas of the building that had previously been under hostile control. More importantly, the consolidation indicated that the attackers were transitioning from an offensive posture focused on mission accomplishment to a defensive posture focused on survival. Elena's exploitation of the tactical gaps created by the attackers' consolidation allowed her to access the building's main communication center, where she discovered that the jamming equipment responsible for isolating Meridian Tower was more sophisticated than she had initially assessed. The devices were military-grade systems that required specialized knowledge to operate effectively, confirming her analysis that the attackers possessed resources and training that exceeded most terrorist organizations or criminal enterprises. Elena's examination of the jamming equipment revealed modification ports that would allow her to reprogram the systems for her own purposes. Her technical training included expertise in electronic warfare systems that would enable her to convert the attacker's communication blackout into a selective transmission capability under her control. The prospect of re-establishing contact with external authorities created new tactical options while potentially providing her with support for the final phase of her operation. The reprogramming of the jamming equipment required Elena to remain exposed in the communication center for nearly 20 minutes, while she modified systems that had been designed to resist tampering. Her work was complicated by the need to maintain the appearance of continued jamming while actually creating selective transmission windows that would be invisible to the attacker's monitoring equipment. The technical challenge was significant, but Elena's specialized training had prepared her for exactly this kind of improvised electronic warfare. Elena's success in modifying the communication systems provided her with the capability to transmit brief messages to external authorities without alerting the attackers to the compromise of their operational security. Her first transmission was a coded message that identified her by her special operations call sign and provided a concise tactical assessment of the situation inside Meridian Tower. The message was designed to reach intelligence analysts with the clearance and background needed to understand both her credentials and the nature of the threat she was countering. The response to Elena's transmission came within minutes and confirmed that her message had reached people with appropriate authority and capabilities. The coded reply informed her that federal tactical units were being mobilized for an assault on Meridian Tower, but that external forces would require detailed intelligence about the attackers' positions and capabilities before they could conduct effective operations. Elena's unique position as an undetected observer inside the hostile environment made her the primary source of tactical intelligence for the planned rescue operation. Elena's role as intelligence coordinator for the external assault force required her to balance her ongoing campaign against the attackers with the need to gather and transmit detailed information about their positions, capabilities, and defensive preparations. Her reconnaissance activities became more systematic and comprehensive as she prepared tactical assessments that would guide the federal response. The intelligence gathering was complicated by the need to remain undetected while conducting increasingly dangerous observation missions in areas under hostile control. The quality of intelligence that Elena was able to provide to external forces exceeded anything that could have been gathered through conventional surveillance or reconnaissance methods. Her 18 months of daily observation in Meridian Tower had given her intimate knowledge of the building's layout and systems, while her special operations background allowed her to assess the attackers' capabilities and vulnerabilities with professional expertise. The combination of detailed environmental knowledge and advanced tactical training made her intelligence reports invaluable for planning the rescue operation. Elena's coordination with external forces was complicated by the need to protect civilian hostages who remained in the attackers' control. Her intelligence reports included detailed assessments of hostage locations and conditions, along with recommendations for assault approaches that would minimize risk to innocent personnel. The planning of the rescue operation required careful balance between speed of execution and protection of civilians, with Elena's real-time intelligence providing the foundation for tactical decisions that would determine the outcome. The final phase of Elena's preparation for the external assault involved positioning herself to provide direct support for the incoming tactical units. Her knowledge of the building's hidden access routes and defensive positions would be crucial for guiding federal agents through the complex environment while avoiding casualties from friendly fire or civilian casualties. Elena's transformation from invisible cleaning woman to tactical coordinator represented a return to the kind of high-stakes operations that had defined her military career. As Elena prepared for the culmination of her invisible war against the attackers, she reflected on the strange path that had brought her back to the world of violence and tactical decision-making she had tried to escape. The peaceful anonymity she had sought as a civilian had been shattered by circumstances that demanded the full application of skills she had hoped never to use again. But the protection of innocent people had always been the fundamental motivation for her military service, and that motivation remained as strong as ever despite her changed circumstances. Elena's dog tags, hidden beneath her cleaning uniform throughout the crisis, would soon identify her to the federal agents who were preparing to assault Meridian Tower. The small metal rectangles carried credentials that would transform her from an unknown civilian into Ghost 7, a special operations veteran whose actions had made the rescue operation possible. But for Elena, the most important recognition would come from the knowledge that her sacrifice of peaceful obscurity had prevented a catastrophic outcome for people who had never known. She possessed the skills to protect them, the first indication that Elena's secret war against the attackers had attracted external attention came at 11:47 a.m. when she intercepted radio communications from federal tactical units, establishing positions around Meridian Tower. The encrypted transmissions were using frequency bands and communication protocols that Elena recognized from her special operations background, confirming that agencies with appropriate capabilities and authority were responding to the crisis she had been fighting alone for over 2 hours. Elena's modified jamming equipment allowed her to monitor the external communications while maintaining the appearance of continued isolation from the attacker's perspective. What she heard through the encrypted channels filled her with both relief and apprehension. The federal response was comprehensive and professional, involving multiple agencies, with specialized capabilities for hostage rescue and counter-terrorism operations. But the scale of the mobilization also indicated that authorities understood the true magnitude of the threat, which meant that Elena's actions had been observed and analyzed by people with the clearance to recognize her. Operational signature, FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez was coordinating the tactical response from a mobile command center that had been established 3 blocks from Meridian Tower. Her analysis of the electronic intelligence surrounding the building had convinced her that someone inside was conducting sophisticated operations against the attackers. But the identity and capabilities of this unknown ally remained a critical gap in her tactical planning. Martinez's experience in complex hostage situations had taught her that unidentified friendlies could be as dangerous as known hostiles if their actions weren't properly coordinated with the official response. Agent Martinez's attempts to establish communication with the unknown operative inside Meridian Tower had been partially successful. But the coded responses she received were using authentication protocols that were restricted to personnel with extremely high security clearances. The call sign, Ghost 7, that appeared in the transmissions was not in any database that Martinez could access, suggesting that the operative was either using false credentials or was associated with programs that existed above her clearance level. Colonel Patterson's arrival at the federal command post brought access to classified databases that could potentially identify the mysterious Ghost 7. His search of special operations personnel records revealed that the call sign had been associated with a female operative who had conducted classified missions in multiple theaters of operation before retiring from active duty 18 months earlier. The operational record was heavily redacted, but the available information indicated exceptional competence in covert operations and unconventional warfare. The discovery that Ghost 7 was Elena Vasquez, a cleaning woman employed at Meridian Tower, created a paradigm shift in how federal authorities understood the situation. The quiet civilian who had been dismissed as irrelevant by both the attackers and most of the building's occupants was actually a decorated special operations veteran with capabilities that exceeded those of most federal agents. Elena's 18 months of invisible observation had provided her with intelligence about the building and its occupants that would have taken other operatives months to acquire. Elena's transition from unknown civilian to identified special operations asset changed the tactical calculus for the federal response in fundamental ways. Instead of conducting a blind assault against unknown forces in an unfamiliar environment, the tactical units could coordinate with an ally who possessed both detailed intelligence about the situation and the training to provide effective support for complex operations. Elena's unique position as an undetected observer inside the hostile environment made her invaluable for guiding the rescue operation. The establishment of secure communications between Elena and the federal command post allowed for the kind of detailed tactical coordination that had been impossible during her solo campaign against the attackers. Elena's intelligence reports provided real-time updates on enemy positions, hostage locations, and building conditions that would guide every aspect of the planned assault. Her recommendations about entry points, movement routes, and timing were based on professional analysis of factors that external observers could not assess. Elena's coordination with the federal response required her to reveal aspects of her background that she had worked carefully to conceal during her civilian life. The tactical discussions with Agent Martinez and Colonel Patterson necessarily involved references to classified operations and specialized capabilities that confirmed Elena's identity as someone who had operated at the highest levels of military intelligence and special operations. The peaceful anonymity she had constructed was being systematically dismantled by the requirements of operational necessity. The psychological impact of returning to tactical coordination with federal agencies was more complex than Elena had anticipated. The familiar rhythms of operational planning and intelligence sharing triggered memories and instincts that she had suppressed during her civilian life, but they also provided a sense of purpose and competence that had been missing from her routine. Work as a cleaning woman. Elena found herself responding to the crisis with skills and knowledge that felt more natural and appropriate than anything she had experienced since leaving military service. Elena's role in coordinating the federal response was complicated by her parallel responsibility to continue her campaign against the attackers until external forces could execute their assault. Her intelligence gathering and harassment operations had to be maintained while simultaneously preparing to guide federal agents through the complex tactical environment of Meridian Tower. The dual requirements demanded perfect operational security and timing to avoid compromising either her own position or the planned rescue operation. The attackers' growing desperation was evident in their increasingly aggressive responses to the systematic complications that Elena had created. Radio communications revealed that they were preparing to accelerate their timeline and conduct an immediate extraction with whatever hostages they had already secured, abandoning their original objectives in favor of salvaging something from an operation that was deteriorating beyond their ability to control. Elena's campaign of disruption had achieved its strategic objective of forcing the attackers into reactive decision-making that created opportunities for external intervention. Elena's intelligence reports to the federal command post included detailed assessments of the attackers' extraction plan and recommendations for interdicting their escape routes. The hostile forces intended to use the building's helicopter landing pad for aerial extraction, but Elena's analysis revealed multiple vulnerabilities in their plan that could be exploited by properly positioned federal agents. Her recommendations included specific tactics for preventing the extraction, while minimizing risk to hostages and civilian personnel. The final phase of Elena's coordination with federal authorities involved her preparation to serve as a tactical guide for the assault teams that would enter Meridian Tower. Her knowledge of the building's hidden access routes and defensive positions would be crucial for allowing federal agents to reach their objectives while avoiding both hostile fire and civilian casualties. Elena's transformation from invisible cleaning woman to tactical coordinator represented a complete return to the operational mindset that had defined her military career. Elena's positioning for the federal assault required her to abandon the secure base of operations she had established and move to a location where she could provide direct support for incoming tactical units. The movement exposed her to detection risks that she had carefully avoided throughout her solo campaign, but the coordination requirements of the rescue operation demanded that she accept increased personal danger in order to maximize the chances of success for the overall mission. Agent Martinez's tactical briefing to the assault teams included detailed information about Elena's capabilities and current position, emphasizing that Ghost 7 was a friendly asset with exceptional qualifications for supporting complex operations in urban environments. The federal agents who would be entering Meridian Tower were professional operators with extensive training, but none of them possessed Elena's combination of special operations experience and intimate knowledge of the specific tactical environment they would be engaging. Elena's final intelligence report to the Federal Command Post provided a comprehensive assessment of the tactical situation that would guide every aspect of the planned assault. Her analysis included specific recommendations about timing, entry points, movement routes, and rules of engagement that were based on professional evaluation of factors that could not be assessed from external observation. The quality of her intelligence reports had convinced federal authorities that the rescue operation would have a high probability of success despite the complexity of the tactical environment, the moment when Elena's dog tags would identify her to the incoming federal agents was rapidly approaching, but she had already accepted that her carefully constructed civilian identity was about to be permanently destroyed. The peaceful anonymity she had sought as a cleaning woman would be replaced by recognition as Ghost 7, a special operations veteran whose actions had made the rescue operation possible. Elena's sacrifice of her desired obscurity was the final price for protecting innocent people from a threat that only she had been positioned to counter. Elena's preparation for the federal assault included a personal reckoning with the path that had brought her back to the world of tactical operations and life-or-death decision-making. The quiet civilian life she had tried to build had been shattered by circumstances that demanded the full application of skills she had hoped never to use again. But the fundamental motivation that had driven her military career remained unchanged. The protection of innocent people justified any personal cost, including the loss of the peaceful existence she had worked so hard to achieve. As Elena positioned herself to guide the incoming assault teams through Meridian Tower's complex tactical environment, she reflected on the strange circumstances that had forced her to resume the identity she had tried to abandon. The cleaning woman who had sought invisibility and anonymity was about to become Ghost 7 once again, a special operations veteran whose skills would prove essential for resolving a crisis that conventional security measures could not address. Elena's return to active duty was involuntary but complete, marking the end of her attempt to escape from the world of violence and tactical decision-making that had defined her previous life. The federal assault on Meridian Tower commenced at 12:34 p.m. with the kind of precision and coordination that Elena recognized from her own military operations. Through her modified communication equipment, she monitored the tactical channels as FBI hostage rescue teams and Delta Force operators moved into position around the building's perimeter. The professional competence evident in their radio communications filled Elena with confidence that the rescue operation would succeed. But she also understood that her role as an internal guide would be crucial for preventing civilian casualties during the complex urban warfare that was about to unfold. Elena's position in the building's service corridors provided her with real-time observation of both the federal agents entering through multiple access points and the attackers' frantic attempts to maintain control of their deteriorating situation. The hostile forces had consolidated their remaining personnel into defensive positions on the upper floors, using their hostages as human shields while preparing for a final extraction attempt that Elena's intelligence had already compromised. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly, with split-second decisions determining the difference between successful rescue and catastrophic failure. FBI Special Agent Lisa Chun was the first federal operative to make direct visual contact with Elena during the assault. Chun had been briefed about Ghost 7's presence in the building, but encountering the legendary special operations veteran in the form of a woman wearing a cleaning uniform was still a jarring experience. Elena's calm professionalism and immediate tactical assessments convinced Chun that the intelligence reports about Ghost 7's capabilities had been accurate, but the disconnect between Elena's appearance and her demonstrated expertise remained surreal. Elena's guidance of Agent Chun through Meridian Tower's hidden access routes demonstrated the value of her 18 months of daily observation in ways that impressed even experienced federal operators. She navigated the building's service areas with absolute confidence, avoiding security cameras and potential ambush points while directing Chun toward positions that would provide tactical advantage against the remaining attackers. Elena's knowledge of the building's unofficial modifications and forgotten spaces proved superior to the architectural blueprints that the federal teams had been using for planning. The coordination between Elena and the federal assault teams required constant adaptation as the tactical situation evolved in real time. Elena's radio communications with multiple team leaders provided them with intelligence updates that allowed them to adjust their approaches based on current enemy positions and hostage locations. Her analysis of the attackers' behavior patterns helped federal agents anticipate tactical movements and prepare countermeasures that prevented the hostile forces from executing their defensive plans effectively. Elena's most critical contribution to the rescue operation came when she identified a hidden route that would allow federal agents to reach the hostages without exposing them to crossfire from the attackers' defensive positions. The route required navigation through utility shafts and maintenance corridors that were not shown on any official building plans, but Elena's intimate knowledge of the facility's infrastructure made the approach possible. Her guidance allowed Agent Chun and her team to position themselves for a simultaneous assault that would overwhelm the attackers before they could harm their captives. The moment when Elena's true identity was revealed to the building's occupants came during the rescue of Margaret Winters from the 34th floor conference room where she had been held hostage. Winters watched in amazement as the quiet cleaning woman she had dismissed for months coordinated a complex tactical operation with federal agents, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded those of most military professionals. The transformation was so complete and unexpected that Winters initially questioned whether she was experiencing some form of stress-induced hallucination. Elena's interaction with the rescued hostages required her to balance operational necessities with the psychological trauma that the civilian personnel had experienced during their captivity. Her training in hostage psychology helped her provide reassurance and direction to people who were struggling to process the violence they had witnessed, while simultaneously coordinating their evacuation through routes that would minimize their exposure to ongoing tactical operations in other parts of the building. David Chun's rescue from the Blackstone defense contractors' offices provided another dramatic revelation of Elena's capabilities to people who had never suspected her background. Chun had spent months working in proximity to Elena without recognizing that she possessed security clearances that exceeded his own and operational experience that dwarfed his theoretical knowledge of defense contracting. The quiet woman who had cleaned his office was actually someone who had conducted the kind of classified operations that Chun only knew about through sanitized briefing documents. Elena's coordination with the federal teams was complicated by her discovery that one of the attackers had been wounded but remained in a position where he could threaten civilian personnel if the assault was not executed with perfect precision. Her analysis of the tactical situation required her to personally neutralize this threat, while federal agents engaged the other hostile forces, demanding that she expose herself to significant danger in order to protect innocent people from a desperate enemy's final act of violence. The elimination of the wounded attacker required Elena to demonstrate the close-quarters combat skills that had been refined during her most dangerous covert operations. The engagement took place in a confined space with multiple civilians in the immediate area, requiring precision and restraint that exceeded the capabilities of most operators. Elena's successful neutralization of the threat without collateral damage confirmed the federal agent's assessment that Ghost 7's reputation had been well earned during her military career. Marcus Thompson's encounter with Elena during the final phase of the rescue operation, provided him with answers to questions that had puzzled him. Throughout her employment at Meridian Tower, the security chief had recognized something familiar about Elena's situational awareness and tactical thinking, but he had never imagined that she was a special operations veteran with clearances and experience that exceeded his own military background. Thompson's realization that he had been working alongside a legend, without knowing it, was both humbling and inspiring. Elena's post-assault coordination with federal authorities required her to provide detailed debriefings about the attackers' capabilities, objectives, and potential connections to larger terrorist or criminal organizations. Her intelligence gathering during the crisis had provided crucial information about the hostile forces' training, equipment, and operational methods that would be valuable for preventing similar attacks in the future. Elena's professional analysis of the threat helped federal agencies understand the scope and sophistication of the POV operation they had just defeated. The medical evaluation that Elena underwent after the rescue operation revealed the physical toll that her solo campaign against the attackers had demanded. Despite her exceptional conditioning and training, the stress of conducting complex tactical operations while maintaining her cover identity had pushed her to the limits of human endurance. The combination of physical exertion, psychological pressure, and sleep deprivation would have incapacitated most people, but Elena had continued to function at peak effectiveness throughout the crisis. Elena's reunion with James Morrison in the hospital emergency room provided both of them with closure about the events that had transformed their quiet workplace into a battlefield. Morrison's expression of gratitude for Elena's rescue efforts was complicated by his amazement at discovering that the cleaning woman who had saved his life was actually a decorated special operations veteran. The revelation forced Morrison to reconsider every interaction he had ever had with Elena, viewing them through the new lens of her true identity and capabilities. The media attention that followed the successful resolution of the Meridian Tower crisis focused primarily on the federal agency's professional response, but Elena's role as Ghost 7 remained classified at levels that prevented public disclosure. Her preference for anonymity aligned with operational security requirements that protected both her identity and the methods she had used to defeat the attackers. Elena's return to obscurity was voluntary but incomplete, since her actions had been witnessed by too many people for her civilian identity to remain entirely intact. Elena's debriefing sessions with federal intelligence agencies revealed the full scope of her contributions to the successful resolution of the crisis. Her systematic campaign against the attackers had degraded their capabilities, disrupted their timeline, and created the tactical opportunities that had made the rescue operation possible. Without Elena's invisible war against the hostile forces, the outcome would likely have been catastrophic for both the hostages and any federal agents who attempted to assault the building. The psychological impact of Elena's return to active tactical operations was something that would require ongoing attention from military mental health professionals who understood the unique stresses of special operations careers. Elena's transition back to civilian life had been disrupted by circumstances that forced her to resume the identity she had tried to abandon, creating complex emotional and psychological challenges that would need to be addressed as she attempted to rebuild her post-military existence. Elena's reflection on the events at Meridian Tower included recognition that her attempt to escape from her military identity had been fundamentally unrealistic. The skills, instincts, and moral commitments that had defined her special operations career could not be abandoned simply by changing jobs and living arrangements. Elena's true identity as a protector of innocent people had never really changed. Regardless of her official occupation or desired lifestyle, the building's return to normal operations would be complicated by the knowledge that Elena Vasquez, the quiet cleaning woman, was actually Ghost 7, a special operations legend whose capabilities had saved hundreds of lives. The invisible worker who had been dismissed by executives and ignored by security personnel was revealed to be someone whose service record and security clearances exceeded those of most general officers. Elena's transformation from overlooked civilian to recognized veteran represented a complete reversal of the assumptions that had governed her interactions with colleagues and superiors. 6 months after the Meridian Tower crisis, Elena stood before a classroom filled with federal agents, military personnel, and corporate security professionals, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had sustained her through decades of high-stakes operations. The training facility at Quantico buzzed with an energy that Elena recognized from her military days, but her perspective had fundamentally shifted from operator to instructor, from someone who executed missions to someone who prepared others to handle the impossible. The audience looking back at her represented the elite of America's security establishment, individuals who had heard whispered stories about Ghost 7, but were now learning directly from the legend herself. Elena's transition from invisible cleaning woman to sought-after instructor had been as dramatic as any transformation in her military career, but she approached teaching with the same methodical precision that had characterized her operational work. Threat recognition begins with understanding that danger often wears familiar faces, Elena said, pointing to surveillance photographs from the Meridian Tower operation. The attackers who nearly succeeded in their mission looked exactly like the business visitors who entered that building every day. Your ability to identify genuine threats depends not on appearance, but on behavioral patterns that most people never learn to see. Elena's curriculum drew heavily from her 18 months of observation at Meridian Tower, transforming her experience as an overlooked civilian into tactical lessons that could save lives in future operations. Her unique perspective as someone who had operated both inside and outside the security establishment provided insights that traditional training programs couldn't replicate. She had seen threats develop from both sides of the professional divide. FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who had coordinated the federal response to the Meridian Tower crisis, was auditing Elena's course to better understand the capabilities that had made the rescue operation possible. Martinez's respect for Elena's expertise had grown enormously since their collaboration during the crisis, but watching Elena teach revealed depths of knowledge and analytical thinking that even the classified debriefings had not fully captured. The most dangerous assumption you can make, Elena continued, is that threats will announce themselves through obvious indicators. Professional adversaries succeed by blending into environments where they're expected to belong. Your survival depends on recognizing the subtle inconsistencies that separate genuine personnel from infiltrators with hostile intentions. Elena's teaching methodology reflected the same systematic approach that had characterized her military operations. Each lesson built deliberately on previous concepts, creating a comprehensive framework for threat assessment that could be applied across multiple environments and scenarios. Her students learned not just to identify specific threats, but to think like Elena herself, analyzing situations with the kind of methodical precision that had made her so effective as an operator, taught the corporate security professionals in Elena's audience were particularly fascinated by her insights into the vulnerabilities that existed in routine business environments. Elena's months of cleaning offices and observing executive behavior had revealed security lapses that were invisible to people who worked within corporate hierarchies, but potentially catastrophic if exploited by trained adversaries. Every organization has invisible personnel who observe more than anyone realizes, Elena explained. Cleaning staff, maintenance workers, security guards, and delivery personnel move through your facilities with access that equals or exceeds your own. The question you must ask is whether you've verified that these people are actually who they claim to be. Elena's revelation that she had identified 17 different ways to compromise Meridian Tower security before the attack even began demonstrated the value of viewing familiar environments through the lens of hostile intentions. Her analysis had been conducted unconsciously during routine cleaning work, but it provided a template for systematic vulnerability assessment that her students could apply to their own facilities and responsibilities. Colonel Patterson, who had been instrumental in identifying Elena during the crisis, found himself taking notes like a junior officer despite his decades of military experience. Elena's perspective on operational security was informed by experiences that exceeded those of most flag officers, and her ability to translate covert operations expertise into practical civilian applications was proving invaluable for Homeland Security planning. The most critical skill you can develop, Elena said, is the ability to become invisible in plain sight. This applies whether you're gathering intelligence, conducting surveillance, or positioning yourself to respond to developing threats. People see what they expect to see, and your effectiveness depends on managing those expectations. Elena's discussion of invisibility techniques drew directly from her success in operating undetected within Meridian Tower during the crisis. Her ability to move through the building while conducting tactical operations had been crucial for disrupting the attackers' plans, but it also demonstrated principles that could be applied by security personnel in less dramatic circumstances. Psychological aspects of Elena's teaching were perhaps the most valuable elements of her curriculum. Her insights into human behavior under stress, the decision-making patterns of professional adversaries, and the mental preparation required for effective crisis response reflected knowledge that could only be gained through direct experience. In life-or-death situations, survival is not about physical capabilities or equipment, Elena explained. It's about maintaining analytical thinking when everyone around you is reacting emotionally. The person who can continue to process information and make rational decisions while others panic is the person who will determine the outcome of any crisis. Elena's students included several executives from major corporations who had requested personal security training after learning about the Meridian Tower attack. These individuals were discovering that their assumptions about personal safety and corporate security had been dangerously naive, but Elena's teaching provided them with practical tools for improving their own protection and that of their organizations. Margaret Winters, the former Meridian Financial CFO who had been rescued by Elena during the crisis, had become one of Elena's most dedicated students. Winters' experience as a hostage had convinced her that corporate executives needed to understand security from the ground up rather than delegating responsibility to others. Her presence in Elena's classroom represented a fundamental shift in how business leaders approached personal and organizational protection. "The most important lesson I can teach you," Elena said as the session neared its conclusion, "is that your safety depends on the capabilities of people you might never notice. The individuals who clean your offices, maintain your facilities, and provide your security are the ones who will determine whether you survive when things go wrong. Treat them accordingly." Elena's emphasis on respecting support personnel reflected her own experience of being dismissed and underestimated during her time as a cleaning woman. The executives and security professionals in her audience were learning that their survival might depend on people whose contributions they had never properly valued or understood. The transformation of Elena's life from invisible cleaning woman to respected instructor represented more than just a career change. It reflected a fundamental shift in how the security establishment understood the relationship between official authority and actual capability. Elena's story had become a case study in the danger of assumptions and the value of recognizing expertise, wherever it might be found. As Elena concluded her presentation, she reflected on the strange path that had brought her from covert operations to corporate cleaning to federal instruction. Each phase of her journey had contributed to her current effectiveness as a teacher, providing her with perspectives and insights that could not have been gained through conventional military or civilian careers. Elena had finally found a way to serve and protect that honored both her operational background, and her desire for a meaningful civilian life. The quiet woman who had once sought invisibility and anonymity had become a teacher whose influence would spread throughout America's security establishment, training the next generation of protectors to recognize threats that others would miss and to value capabilities that might be hidden in unexpected places. 2 years after the Meridian Tower incident, Elena received a phone call that would once again challenge her carefully constructed civilian life. The voice on the other end belonged to General Patricia Hawkins, the Pentagon's Deputy Director of Special Operations, who had been following Elena's transition from operator to instructor with considerable interest. General Hawkins' call was not a routine check-in, but a formal request for Elena to consider returning to active duty for a mission that required her unique combination of skills and experience. Go 7, General Hawkins said, using Elena's operational call sign with the respect it commanded throughout the special operations community. We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires someone with your specific capabilities. The mission parameters are unlike anything we've encountered before, and your success at Meridian Tower has convinced us that you're the only operator who can handle the complexities involved. Elena listened to the classified briefing with the same analytical attention that had characterized her military career, but her response reflected the perspective she had gained during her civilian years. The mission General Hawkins described was certainly within Elena's capabilities, but it would require her to abandon the teaching position that had become central to her identity and return to the world of covert operations that she had worked so hard to leave behind. General, Elena replied after careful consideration, I'm honored by your confidence, but my current work is serving a strategic purpose that extends beyond any single mission. The agents and security professionals I'm training will multiply the impact of my expertise across hundreds of future operations. I believe I can serve my country more effectively as an instructor than as an active operator. Elena's decision to decline the Pentagon's request represented a fundamental shift in how she understood her value to national security. During her active duty years, she had measured success by individual missions completed and specific threats neutralized. Her civilian experience had taught her that sharing knowledge and developing capabilities in others could have far greater strategic impact than any solo operation, regardless of its immediate importance. General Hawkins' response revealed the military establishment's growing recognition of Elena's contributions to Homeland Security through her training programs. Ghost 7, your work at Quantico has already influenced security protocols at over 300 federal facilities. The techniques you've developed for threat recognition are being implemented throughout the intelligence community. We understand that your current mission is critically important. The conversation with General Hawkins prompted Elena to reflect on the unexpected direction her life had taken since the Meridian Tower crisis. She had initially viewed her teaching assignment as a temporary obligation, a way of sharing hard-earned lessons before returning to private civilian life. But the enthusiasm of her students and the obvious impact of her curriculum had gradually transformed instruction from duty into passion. Elena's influence on the security establishment extended far beyond her formal classroom instruction. Her case study of the Meridian Tower operation had become required reading at military academies, FBI training facilities, and corporate security programs throughout the country. The detailed analysis of how an invisible civilian had countered a sophisticated terrorist operation provided lessons that were reshaping how professionals thought about threat assessment and crisis response. Marcus Thompson, who had become Elena's most vocal advocate within the security community, regularly used her story to challenge assumptions about capability and expertise. Thompson's presentations to corporate security conferences emphasized that the most valuable assets in any organization might be the people who seemed least important to formal management structures. Elena's example had convinced many executives to reconsider how they evaluated and utilized their personnel. Elena's teaching had evolved to include consultation work with major corporations, seeking to improve their security postures based on lessons learned from the Meridian Tower attack. These engagements allowed Elena to apply her expertise to specific organizational challenges, while maintaining her primary focus on training the next generation of security professionals. The consulting work also provided her with insights into current threat environments that enhanced her classroom instruction. The psychological aspect of Elena's transition from operator to instructor had been more complex than she had initially anticipated. Teaching required her to constantly revisit and analyze experiences that she had previously compartmentalized for her own psychological protection. But the process of sharing her knowledge had also provided her with a sense of closure about her military career that pure retirement had never achieved. Elena's relationship with her former Meridian Tower colleagues had evolved into genuine friendships, based on mutual respect rather than the invisible employer-employer dynamic that had previously defined their interactions. Margaret Winters had become not just a student, but a collaborator, working with Elena to develop security awareness programs for corporate executives who lacked military or law enforcement backgrounds. David Chun's involvement in Elena's corporate consulting work had provided him with practical applications for the theoretical security knowledge he had gained through his defense contracting career. Chun's combination of industry connections and technical expertise complemented Elena's operational experience, creating a partnership that was helping reshape how defense contractors approached facility security and personnel protection. Elena's recognition within the security community had brought opportunities that she had never anticipated during her military career. Publishers approached her about writing memoirs or tactical manuals, while television producers sought her participation in documentaries about counterterrorism and homeland security. Elena declined most of these opportunities, preferring to maintain the professional focus that had always characterized her approach to service. The establishment of the Elena Vasquez Institute for Security Excellence at Quantico represented formal recognition of her contributions to national security. Education. The Institute provided Elena with resources and support staff that allowed her to expand her curriculum beyond basic threat recognition to include advanced courses in crisis leadership, organizational security, and strategic threat assessment. Elena's students at the Institute included not just federal agents and military personnel, but also corporate executives, university administrators, and local law enforcement officials who needed to understand security from perspectives that traditional training programs couldn't provide. The diversity of her audience required Elena to constantly adapt her teaching methods while maintaining the analytical rigor that made her instruction so effective. The international recognition of Elena's expertise led to invitations to consult with allied nations seeking to improve their own homeland security capabilities. These engagements allowed Elena to share American security innovations while learning about threat environments and response techniques that were being developed in other countries. The international perspective enhanced Elena's understanding of global security challenges and improved her domestic instruction. Elena's decision to remain in her teaching role rather than returning to active operations reflected a mature understanding of how she could best serve her country and her profession. The influence she wielded as an instructor and consultant exceeded anything she could have achieved as an individual operator, regardless of her exceptional skills and experience. Elena had found a way to multiply her impact while maintaining the sense of purpose that had always driven her service. The quiet cleaning woman, who had once sought invisibility and anonymity, had become one of America's most influential security educators, shaping how thousands of professionals approached their protective responsibilities. Elena's transformation from overlooked civilian to respected teacher represented not just personal growth, but a fundamental shift in how the security establishment understood the relationship between appearance and capability. between official authority and actual expertise. 5 years after the Meridian Tower crisis, Elena stood before the graduating class of the Elena Vasquez Institute's Advanced Security Program, watching as federal agents, corporate executives, and military officers received certificates that represented months of intensive training in threat recognition and crisis response. The diversity of the audience reflected how far her influence had spread throughout America's security establishment. But Elena's satisfaction came not from personal recognition, but from knowing that these professionals would carry her lessons to organizations across the country. The Institute had become more than Elena had ever imagined possible during her transition from operator to instructor. What began as a simple effort to share hard-earned lessons had evolved into a comprehensive educational program that was reshaping how security professionals approached their responsibilities. Elena's curriculum now included courses on organizational psychology, threat modeling, and strategic security planning that drew from her unique perspective as someone who had operated on both sides of the security equation. Elena's legacy lived on not in the medals she had earned or the missions she had completed, but in the thousands of professionals who had learned to see threats that others would miss, to value capabilities that might be hidden in unexpected places, and to never underestimate the quiet ones who might hold the keys to survival when everything else failed. The ceremony concluded with Elena receiving an unexpected honor, a Congressional Medal of Freedom for her contributions to national security education. As the applause filled the auditorium, Elena thought about the invisible cleaning woman she had once been, dismissed and overlooked by everyone around her. But the most meaningful moment came when a young FBI agent approached her after the ceremony. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I'm the daughter of James Morrison, the security guard you saved at Meridian Tower. Because of what you taught me about recognizing hidden capabilities, I just helped prevent a major attack at a federal courthouse. The janitor everyone ignored had been gathering intelligence for months. Your lessons saved lives." Elena smiled, understanding that her true legacy wasn't in the recognition or accolades, but in the ripple effect of awareness spreading through America's security community. She had proven that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they push cleaning carts, work night shifts, or occupy positions that society deems insignificant. As Elena walked through the institute that bore her name, she passed photos of her students who had gone on to prevent attacks, save lives, and protect innocent people using the principles she had taught them. The quiet cleaning woman who had walked out of enemy territory carrying her unit's flag had become something even more powerful, a teacher whose influence would protect countless lives for generations to come. Elena's story reminded everyone that greatness often hides in plain sight, waiting for the moment when circumstances demand that ordinary people do extraordinary things. What did you think of Elena's incredible journey from overlooked cleaner to national security legend? Have you ever encountered someone whose capabilities surprised you completely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing community. If stories like this inspire you to see the world differently, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We bring you real tales of courage, resilience, and hidden heroes every week. Join our family of storytellers and never miss another incredible journey.